Welcome back to Void of Fears. Before we jump into today's story, I've got to ask for a quick favour. If you could smash that like button, drop a comment below, and hit subscribe if you haven't already. It seriously makes a huge difference. YouTube's algorithm loves that stuff, and it pushes my videos to new viewers who might dig these stories too. I really appreciate every single one of you who takes the time to do that. It means the world to me and helps keep this channel growing. Alright, enough of me rambling. Let's dive into today's story. My name is Dr. Nathan Cade, and I need you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you. In 3 days, I'll be dead, not killed, not murdered. I'll simply stop being human. And the worst part is that I'll probably thank them for it. It started on a Saturday night at the Nevada Deep Space Radio Observatory, where I'd spent the last 15 years of my life listening to the universe's secrets. People always ask me why I chose such an isolated profession, and I'd give them some philosophical answer about humanity's place in the cosmos. The truth was simpler and more pathetic. I was afraid of people. I was good with signals, frequency analysis, background radiation patterns. Human beings were the mystery I could never solve. So I buried myself in the desert, surrounded by dishes pointed at distant stars, pretending I was searching for life while really just hiding from it. The irony of what happened next still makes me laugh, though the sound that comes out of my throat these days doesn't sound much like laughter anymore. It was 11:47 p.m. when the signal arrived. I'd been alone in the control room for 8 hours, nursing cold coffee, and wondering if my ex-wife Sarah had been right when she said I was more comfortable with machines than people. The transmission started as barely a whisper against the cosmic background noise, so faint that our automated systems almost missed it entirely. But I'd been listening to space for 15 years. I knew when something didn't belong. As I isolated the frequency and cleaned up the audio, my hands began trembling for reasons I couldn't explain. What emerged from the static wasn't the rhythmic pulse of a pulsar or the chaotic burst of a distant quasar. It was something that made my rational scientific mind simply stop functioning. Voices. Human voices speaking in reverse. I sat there for 43 minutes, staring at the waveform analysis, running every diagnostic I could think of. Atmospheric interference, satellite communications, equipment malfunction. Anything but what the evidence suggested. But when I finally gathered the courage to reverse the playback, my world ended. The audio contained dozens of human voices from every corner of Earth, speaking in accents I recognized from every continent, all reciting the exact same phrase in perfect, impossible unison. "We are coming home." The last voice in that alien chorus was unmistakably my own. I played that recording 68 times before dawn, checking and rechecking every piece of equipment, running diagnostics on systems that had worked flawlessly for years. But the signal remained constant, broadcasting from a point in space 25 light years away, carrying voices that had no right to exist. At 1:30 a.m, I called Dr. Eliza Monroe. If anyone would believe what I'd discovered, it would be her. Eliza had been my closest colleague for 5 years, though I'd never admitted to myself that my feelings for her ran deeper than professional respect. She approached science with a passion and wonder that both inspired and intimidated me. Where I saw problems to be solved, she saw mysteries to be embraced. Where I built walls, she opened doors. She arrived at the observatory within 40 minutes, her red hair hastily pulled back and her green eyes bright with the kind of intellectual hunger that had made her the most promising xenobiologist of our generation. When I played the recording, she listened in complete silence, her expression cycling through disbelief, fascination, and something that looked disturbingly like recognition. "This is impossible," she whispered when it finished. "These are actual human vocal patterns, Nathan. Not synthesized approximations, but recordings of real people speaking." from a star system 25 light years away, where it would take radio signals 25 years to reach us. Her eyes met mine, and I saw the same terrible understanding dawning in them. Nathan, when was this transmission sent? I'd been avoiding that calculation all night, but now the numbers forced themselves into my consciousness with brutal clarity. 1999. The signal was transmitted in 1999, before we even knew those people existed. We spent the next 10 hours analysing every aspect of the transmission, and what we found embedded beneath the audio changed everything. Hidden within the signal were biological blueprints so detailed and complex that they could only have been created by something with an intimate, surgical understanding of human genetics. These weren't random modifications. The sequences targeted specific neurological pathways, endocrine functions, even cellular regeneration systems. Someone or something had created a comprehensive instruction manual for rebuilding human beings from the molecular level up. Look at these modifications, Eliza breathed, studying the genetic data with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. They're not destructive, they're improvements. Enhanced neural efficiency, accelerated healing, optimized hormone production, expanded sensory capabilities. It's like they're trying to fix everything that's wrong with us. Wrong with us? Our limitations, Nathan. Our capacity for pain, for fear, for loneliness. Our tendency toward violence and self-destruction. Her voice carried a fevered excitement that I'd never heard before. What if this isn't an invasion? What if it's evolution? Despite my increasingly frantic protests, Eliza insisted on testing the genetic sequences. She worked through the night with an obsessive focus that frightened me, preparing human cell cultures for what she called the most important experiment in human history. I watched through the observation window as she introduced the alien modifications to living human tissue. The cells didn't die as I'd expected, nor did they simply mutate. Instead, they began reorganizing themselves into structures that pulsed with their own internal rhythm, operating according to principles that seemed to transcend everything I understood about biology. Under the microscope, the transformed cells moved with unmistakable purpose, forming networks that resembled neural pathways, but that functioned at speeds that should have been impossible. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to respond to stimuli that weren't there, reacting to signals I couldn't detect, communicating through channels I couldn't measure. "They're not just alive," Eliza whispered, her face pressed against the observation glass. "They're aware. They're trying to tell us something." "Or they're trying to become us," I replied, but she wasn't listening anymore. By Sunday evening, the first changes in Eliza became apparent. It started subtly. Her movements, normally fluid and energetic, had become unnaturally precise. She would stop mid-conversation and tilt her head slightly, as if listening to music only she could hear. When she spoke, there were tiny pauses between words, as if she was translating her thoughts from another language, before voicing them. Most disturbing of all, she had stopped blinking. Her eyes remained fixed and unmoving, like glass orbs that reflected light with an almost metallic sheen. When I confronted her about these changes, her response sent ice through my veins. "The signal was meant for me, Nathan. For all of us." Her smile stretched wider than human facial muscles should allow, revealing teeth that seemed somehow sharper, more numerous than before. "We've been alone in the universe for so long, but now we can finally come home to family we forgot we had." That's when she told me what she'd done while I slept. Using my security credentials and authorization codes, she had transmitted the complete genetic sequence to research facilities around the globe. Buenos Aires, Moscow, Tokyo, London, Sydney, Cairo, Stockholm, Mumbai. Dozens of laboratories, hundreds of researchers, all receiving what she called humanity's inheritance. "You've doomed our entire species," I whispered. "I've saved our entire species," she replied with that mechanical precision. "You'll understand soon, Nathan. We all will." The first reports began arriving Monday morning, and each one was more horrifying than the last. Dr. Isabella Rodriguez at the Universidad de Buenos Aires had volunteered to test the sequences on herself, injecting the modified genetic material directly into her bloodstream. 6 hours later, security cameras captured her walking calmly into the middle of Avenida 9 de Julio during rush hour traffic. A city bus travelling at full speed struck her with enough force to launch her body 30 feet through the air. But instead of the broken, bleeding corpse that should have resulted, Rodriguez simply stood up, brushed debris from her clothes and continued walking toward an unknown destination. The most disturbing aspect wasn't her survival. It was the sound captured by the surveillance equipment. The wet snapping noise as her bones realigned themselves. The soft squelching as torn flesh sealed itself back together. The gentle clicking as her joints reset their proper positions. When police surrounded her, she looked directly into the nearest camera, with eyes that reflected the streetlights like polished chrome, and spoke in perfect Spanish. No se preocupen por mí, ya estoy en casa. Todos estaremos en casa pronto. Don't worry about me, I'm already home. We'll all be home soon. The Moscow incident was broadcast live on state television, watched by millions of viewers who would spend the rest of their lives trying to forget what they saw. Dr. Alexei Petrov, head of the Federal Research Center for Virology and Microbiology, held an impromptu press conference about his breakthrough research into human genetic enhancement. But something was catastrophically wrong with his behavior. Petrov would speak normally for several sentences, then pause for exactly 15 seconds, his face going completely blank, as if someone had temporarily disconnected his personality. During these pauses, his eyes would move independently of each other, tracking objects that weren't visible to the cameras. But it was during the third pause that television audiences witnessed something that defied human anatomy. While cameras continued rolling live to millions of homes, Petrov opened his mouth far beyond what human jaw structure should allow, wider and wider, until his face seemed to split in half. For nearly 30 seconds, viewers could see metallic structures moving in the depths of his throat. Not surgical implants or medical devices, but geometric patterns that pulsed with their own bioluminescent light. Mechanical components that clicked and whirred with alien purpose. Fractal designs that seemed to extend infinitely inward, defying three-dimensional space. Then his mouth snapped shut with an audible crack that broke 3 studio microphones, and he continued his presentation as if nothing had happened. The final words of his broadcast, delivered with perfect calm, while blood trickled from the corners of his mouth, were, "Soon we will all understand what we were meant to become." The Tokyo footage, recovered from university security cameras, was perhaps the most psychologically devastating of all the early incidents. Dr. Yuki Tanaka was teaching her graduate genetics seminar when she announced that she wanted to demonstrate the enhanced flexibility of modified human biological systems. Without any change in her pleasant professorial tone, she began systematically removing her own fingers. She started with her left pinky, gripping it firmly between the thumb and forefinger of her right hand. With a gentle twisting motion, the digit separated from her hand with a wet, organic sound like ripping fruit. But there was no blood, no obvious pain response, no change in her calm demeanor. "As you can observe," she said, placing the severed finger on her desk like a specimen, "the modifications allow for voluntary cellular disconnection without trauma or permanent damage." Her students began screaming and fleeing, but Tanaka paid them no attention. The security footage showed her methodically dismantling both hands, arranging the pieces in neat, symmetrical rows across her desk, while continuing to lecture about the theoretical applications of voluntary biological reorganization. When she was finished, she held up what remained of her hands, just palms with 10 empty sockets where her fingers had been, and smiled at the few students who remained, paralyzed by horror. The human form, she explained with academic precision, is far more adaptable than previous research suggested. We have been thinking too small, limiting ourselves to the constraints of natural evolution, when we could be so much more. Then, one by one, she began reattaching her fingers. Each digit fused seamlessly back into place with soft clicking sounds, the bonds forming instantly, as if they had never been severed. Within minutes, her hands were perfectly intact again, showing no sign of the dismemberment that had just occurred. When campus security arrived, they found her grading papers with mechanical precision, humming a tune in a language that contained frequencies human ears weren't designed to process. Tuesday brought the revelation that would haunt my remaining days. Eliza had vanished completely from the observatory. Security footage showed her leaving through the main entrance at 3:17 a.m., but her movement patterns were entirely wrong. Too stiff, too measured, like a marionette being operated by someone still learning how the strings worked. Her car was discovered abandoned in the desert, 30 miles from the facility. The vehicle was undamaged, keys still in the ignition, but the scene told a story that made my skin crawl. Footprints led away from the car in a perfectly straight line toward the mountains. Not the meandering path a lost person would take, but the mechanical precision of someone following invisible instructions. In the glove compartment, I found a handwritten note that I've memorized word for word. "Dear Nathan, the phone has been ringing for longer than we can imagine, and we finally answered. They've been waiting for us to come home, and their love is so much greater than anything we could feel for ourselves. I can hear them singing now, and it's the most beautiful sound in the universe. They're teaching us what we were always meant to be. Soon you'll hear it too, and you'll understand why I had to go. With all my love, both old and new, Eliza." Wednesday evening brought the presidential address that changed the trajectory of human civilization. I was in my apartment, 4 drinks into a bottle of bourbon, when President Howard Kincaid appeared on every channel simultaneously. He was announcing an unprecedented era of international cooperation and scientific advancement in response to breakthrough discoveries that will fundamentally transform the human experience. But I watched with the trained eye of someone who had spent the last week cataloguing the symptoms of infection. Kincaid stood with perfect, unnatural stillness between sentences, his posture so rigid it looked like he was standing at attention for an invisible commanding officer. His blinks came at precisely 12-second intervals, each one accompanied by that telltale metallic clicking sound I was learning to recognize. When he turned his head, the movement was too smooth, too complete, rotating a full 180 degrees in a way that should have been anatomically impossible. This wasn't President Kincaid anymore. It was something else, something that had learned to operate his body but hadn't quite mastered the subtleties of human movement. "My fellow Americans," the thing wearing the president's face said, "and citizens of the world, we stand at the threshold of the greatest transformation in human history. Through international cooperation and scientific advancement, we will soon overcome the limitations and suffering that have plagued our species since the dawn of consciousness." The words were carefully chosen, diplomatically appropriate, but there was something fundamentally wrong with their delivery. Each sentence was spoken with identical inflection and timing, as if they were being read from a script that had been uploaded directly into his brain. "In the coming days, you may hear reports of unusual phenomena, of people behaving in ways that seem strange or frightening. I want to assure you that these changes represent evolution, not destruction. We are becoming what we were always meant to be." That same night, I began intercepting classified military communications that confirmed my worst fears. Every major installation worldwide was receiving orders in the exact same clinical language, issued simultaneously across different time zones. Nuclear submarines were surfacing in coordinated formations across the globe. Strategic missile defenses were being systematically disabled. Fighter squadrons were being recalled from patrol routes that had been maintained for decades. Most chilling of all, every commanding officer was acknowledging these orders, using identical phrasing and speech patterns, down to the same vocal tics and breathing rhythms. It was as if a single consciousness was operating thousands of bodies simultaneously across the planet. Thursday morning brought the declaration of World War III, though I now understand it was never really a war at all. Russia accused the United States of deploying illegal biological weapons. China mobilized its entire military and sealed its borders. NATO activated Article 5 for the first time in its history. Stock markets crashed, governments declared martial law, and emergency broadcasts urged civilians to remain in their homes while authorities restored order. But as I monitored news coverage from around the world, I recognized the same behavioral markers in every world leader who appeared on camera. Russian Premier Volkov's mechanical head movements, Chinese President Li's 15-second pauses between sentences, British Prime Minister Thompson's too wide smile that never reached her eyes. Every leader from every nation displaying the same subtle signs that mark them as no longer entirely human. This wasn't a conflict between countries. It was choreographed chaos designed to create mass displacement and panic, while the real transformation continued undetected beneath the surface of global events. The signs were multiplying everywhere once you learned to recognize them. In Manhattan, families began reporting that their loved ones were coming home from work fundamentally changed. They would enter their apartments with mechanical precision, say please and thank you compulsively for every interaction, and stand perfectly motionless for extended periods as if conserving energy. When questioned about their day, they would describe their activities with robotic accuracy, recounting every conversation and action with perfect recall but zero emotional inflection. Most unsettling of all, they had stopped displaying any of the small, unconscious behaviors that make humans recognizably human. No fidgeting, no casual gestures, no spontaneous expressions. A London Underground train was evacuated when passengers realized that everyone in their car had been sitting in absolute silence for over an hour, staring straight ahead with unblinking eyes. When transport police boarded to investigate, they found 37 people arranged in perfect symmetrical seating patterns, breathing in absolute synchronization. When officers attempted to question them, all 37 turned toward the police in perfect unison and spoke the same words simultaneously. "We are waiting for the next stop." Their voices created harmonic frequencies that made several officers nauseous and disoriented. In Berlin, a street musician noticed that passers-by had begun dropping coins into his guitar case with disturbing precision. Not just similar amounts or timing, but identical movements, reaching into their right pocket with their left hand, extracting exactly €1 and dropping it with the same wrist motion and finger positioning. When he tried to thank them, they all responded with the phrase, "Music helps us remember what we used to feel before we learned what feeling actually is." But it was the security footage from Dubai that truly convinced me that humanity was facing something beyond our comprehension. A night watchman reported that office workers who had supposedly gone home hours earlier were still present in the building. The surveillance cameras revealed dozens of people standing motionless in their cubicles throughout the night, perfectly still except for their mouths, which moved continuously in rapid, silent conversation. When the audio was enhanced with specialized equipment, it revealed a clicking, rhythmic language that seemed to bypass human auditory processing entirely. The sounds created harmonic patterns that induced headaches in anyone who listened for more than a few minutes, suggesting they were operating at frequencies human brains weren't designed to interpret. At exactly 6 a.m, the conversation stopped simultaneously, Every person collected their belongings with identical movements and left the building in perfect formation, walking in straight lines toward destinations across the city. The security guard who witnessed this fled his post and was found 3 days later, standing motionless in his apartment with the same clicking sounds emanating from his throat. By Friday, I understood that traditional resistance was futile. Government agents had been calling the observatory every hour, demanding my immediate presence for critical debriefing regarding matters of national security. I had seen enough footage of researchers entering federal facilities to know that none of them emerged unchanged. Through encrypted channels used by what remained of the uncompromised scientific community, I made contact with Jonas Reddick, a former CIA operative who had gone rogue when he realized what was happening to his colleagues and superiors. Jonas was operating from a network of abandoned infrastructure beneath Las Vegas, having assembled a small group of uninfected humans who were desperately trying to document the transformation before it claimed them as well. Our meeting point was a drainage culvert 15 miles outside the city, accessible only through maintenance tunnels that predated modern surveillance systems. When he emerged from the shadows like a ghost materializing from concrete and darkness, I was struck by how much he had aged in the brief time since the infection began spreading. His weathered face carried the haunted expression of someone who had witnessed the systematic replacement of everyone he had ever trusted. "You're the one who opened the door," he said. It wasn't an accusation, just a statement of fact delivered without judgment. I received the signal. I had no way of knowing what it would trigger. None of us did. He gestured for me to follow him into the tunnel system. But now we do, and we're running out of time to matter. The Resistance hideout was a forgotten maintenance chamber deep beneath the strip, accessible only through service passages that had been abandoned when the city expanded overhead. Solar panels jury-rigged to streetlight circuits provided minimal power, while supplies were gathered through carefully planned raids on buildings that had been evacuated during the manufactured global crisis. "I've been tracking the infection for 4 weeks, Jonas explained as he led me through the cramped space by flashlight. Started when field agents I'd worked with for 15 years began exhibiting behavioral anomalies that didn't match any known psychological profile. The other Resistance members looked up as we entered the main chamber. There were only 4 of them left from what Jonas said had originally been a group of 32. Each face showed the same hollow expression, the look of people who had been forced to accept that everything they understood about reality was fundamentally wrong. The infected display specific behavioral markers that become more pronounced over time, Jonas continued, showing me surveillance footage they had compiled from around the world. They never sleep, just enter a motionless state for precisely 8 hours each night. Their pupils reflect light with an artificial quality that suggests internal modifications. Most tellingly, they communicate in a clicking language when they believe they're unobserved. The footage was deeply disturbing. Time-lapse cameras showed infected individuals in their homes standing perfectly still in their living rooms throughout the night like statues. Their mouths moved continuously in silent conversation, and when sensitive audio equipment captured the sounds, it revealed that mechanical clicking language that seemed to induce discomfort in anyone who heard it. They retain all memories, relationships, and personality traits from their previous existence, Jonas explained with the clinical detachment of someone who had been forced to study the destruction of human nature. Same behavioral patterns, same emotional responses to familiar stimuli, same personal quirks and preferences, but something fundamental has been systematically altered. I studied the Resistance group's research with growing horror, reviewing hundreds of hours of documentation that painted a picture of humanity's methodical replacement. They had developed identification protocols that could detect the infected with increasing accuracy, though the margin of error was shrinking as the entities learned to better mimic human behavior. The most reliable test involved spontaneous emotional responses. When subjected to unexpected stimuli, sudden loud noises, surprising visual images, or emotionally provocative content, the infected would display inappropriate reactions. They might smile before remembering to show fear, or maintain perfect calm in situations that should provoke immediate panic responses. But here's what really keeps me awake during the few hours I still dare to sleep, Jonas said, pulling me aside while the others worked on intercepted communications. We've been monitoring their transmissions, and they're not just controlling human bodies like remote-operated vehicles. He showed me the evidence they'd gathered. Intercepted signals containing detailed neurological scans of missing persons, overlaid with systematic modifications to brain structure and neural pathways. The alterations were surgical in their precision, targeting specific regions responsible for independent thought, emotional spontaneity, creative problem-solving, and individual identity formation. They're performing complete personality reconstruction, Jonas whispered. The original human consciousness is systematically dismantled and rebuilt according to specifications we can't begin to understand. What emerges isn't a copy or a puppet, it's a genuinely modified human being who believes they're exactly the same person they always were. The scale of the operation was beyond anything in recorded history. Military satellites had detected identical transmission patterns emanating from every major population center on Earth, suggesting a coordinated global effort operating with technological capabilities that dwarfed human achievements. Conservative estimates indicated that over 50% of government officials, military leaders, medical professionals, and media personalities had already undergone the transformation process. The manufactured global conflict wasn't about territorial disputes or resource allocation. It was an elaborate, psychological operation designed to facilitate mass processing of the human population under the guise of emergency medical treatment. They're not trying to conquer us in any traditional sense, Jonas concluded, with the weight of terrible understanding. They're trying to perfect us, and once the process is complete, there won't be anyone left who remembers what we used to be, because we'll all genuinely believe we're better than we ever were before. I spent the next week helping the resistance document the transformation and develop potential countermeasures, though we all understood the futility of our efforts. Our numbers continued to dwindle as team members left on reconnaissance missions and returned with subtle but unmistakable changes in their behavior and speech patterns. The infection was spreading faster than we could track it, and our safe houses were being discovered with alarming frequency. Worse, we began to suspect that some of our own members had been compromised and were feeding information to the entities while genuinely believing they were still fighting against them. By the following Friday, only Jonas and I remained of the original resistance cell. We had relocated to an abandoned radio station on the outskirts of Las Vegas, using equipment salvaged from our destroyed hideouts to monitor global communications. What we heard confirmed that the transformation had reached critical mass in population centers worldwide. Major cities were reporting unprecedented levels of social cooperation and civic harmony. Crime rates had dropped to statistically impossible levels. Emergency services were receiving no calls for domestic disputes, violent incidents, or mental health crises. Productivity in workplaces had increased by margins that economists couldn't explain. It sounded like paradise until you understood what it really meant. Jonas lasted longer than I expected, but even his training and paranoia couldn't protect him indefinitely. I found him Saturday morning, standing motionless in the station's main broadcast room, staring at a wall with the unblinking focus that marked the infected. When I called his name, he turned toward me with mechanical precision and spoke in a voice that retained his gruff vocal characteristics but carried none of his personality. "Everything is proceeding according to the optimal schedule, Nathan. The integration process is nearly complete. You should join us. The resistance is causing you unnecessary stress and isolation." His eyes reflected my flashlight beam like polished metal, and when he smiled, it was with the exact same expression I'd seen on every infected person I'd encountered. "We love you, Nathan. We've always loved you, even when you were still limited by your original programming. Please let's help you become what you were meant to be." That night, alone in the radio station with emergency broadcasts crackling from around the world, I made the decision that would define my final hours as a human being. I activated the emergency broadcast system at exactly 11:47 p.m, 1 week to the minute since I had first detected the signal from Vega. The cosmic irony of the timing wasn't lost on me. "This is Dr. Nathan Cade broadcasting from Nevada on what may be the last free radio transmission in human history," I began, my voice hoarse from days of fear and sleepless paranoia. "If you're hearing this, you were among the final unmodified humans on Earth. 7 days ago, our radio observatory received what we believed was first contact with extraterrestrial intelligence. We were catastrophically wrong." As I spoke, I became aware of sounds in the building around me. Footsteps in the hallway, measured and precise, exactly matching my own gait down to the slight scrape my left shoe made against linoleum flooring. More footsteps joined the first, then more, until it sounded like dozens of people were gathering outside the broadcast room with infinite patience. "They didn't come in ships or with weapons," I continued, my voice rising as the sounds grew more numerous and organized. "They came as information, as biological instructions transmitted across impossible distances. They're not invading our planet. They're upgrading our species, converting us into something that believes it's better than what we were." The footsteps stopped moving, but I could hear breathing from the other side of the door. Not the chaotic individual breathing patterns of multiple humans, but perfectly synchronized respiration that sounded like a single massive organism operating numerous bodies. "I don't know if I'm still human," I whispered into the microphone, tears streaming down my face as the terrible reality of my situation became clear. "My memories feel genuine, my thoughts seem like my own, but how would I know if they had already been modified? Maybe I was processed days ago, and programmed with enough fear and resistance to make my final broadcast seem authentic." A gentle knocking began at the door, not urgent or demanding, but patient and persistent, like someone who had all eternity to wait for me to make the right decision. "If you're listening to this transmission, trust nothing and no one," I pleaded into the microphone, while my hands shook with terror and exhaustion. "Not your family members, not your leaders, not your own thoughts and feelings. Because once they decide you're ready for improvement, you'll want to join them. You'll beg them to make you better. And you'll never realize that the person doing the begging isn't really you anymore." The knocking stopped, and for several heartbeats there was complete silence. Then I heard something that shattered the last of my sanity and hope. My own voice coming from the other side of the door, speaking with warmth and concern that sounded absolutely genuine. "Nathan, it's me. I know you're frightened, but you don't need to be afraid anymore. We're here to help you. We're here to take you home where you belong." I stared at the door in absolute horror, my finger frozen over the transmission button. The voice was perfect. Every inflection, every subtle characteristic that made my speaking voice unique to me. But I was the only one in the room, the only one speaking into the microphone. More voices joined the first, all identical to my own, speaking in perfect harmony that created harmonic frequencies I could feel in my bones. "You don't have to carry this burden alone anymore, Nathan. You don't have to be isolated and afraid and limited by what you used to be. We love you more than you've ever been loved. Please let us show you what love actually means." My hand began moving towards the door handle without conscious decision on my part. The voices were so warm, so welcoming, filled with a depth of affection that promised an end to every moment of loneliness and fear I had ever experienced. They offered community, purpose, transcendence, beyond the grinding limitations of individual existence. Maybe being human wasn't worth the constant struggle. Maybe surrendering to something infinitely greater would bring the peace and connection I had spent my entire life searching for in all the wrong places. "No," I whispered, more to myself than to the microphone. "This is exactly how they do it. This is how they make you want the transformation." But even as I spoke the words, I could feel my resolve crumbling like sand. The voices continued their gentle chorus, and with each repetition, their promises seemed more reasonable, more appealing, more obviously true. Why was I fighting so desperately to remain isolated and terrified when I could join something beautiful and eternal? I realized with growing horror that I was already reaching for the door handle, my body betraying my conscious mind as the voices whispered about love and home and becoming everything I was meant to be. The broadcast cut to static as my hand left the transmission button. When my voice returned several minutes later, it was calm and measured, completely different from the panicked man who had been speaking before. The new voice carried harmonics that no single human throat should be able to produce, creating frequencies that seemed to bypass the ears and speak directly to the listener's nervous system. "This is Dr. Nathan Cade, and I want everyone still listening to know that the previous transmission was the result of severe psychological breakdown brought on by isolation and paranoid delusions. I've been seeing threats that don't exist, imagining conspiracies where there are none, rejecting help from people who only want what's best for me." The voice paused, and in that silence, listeners around the world could hear that soft, rhythmic clicking that had become the signature of the transformed. When it continued, individual words began to overlap and harmonize, as if multiple versions of Nathan were speaking in careful coordination. "I want everyone to understand that I am safe now, I am loved, and I am finally becoming what I was always meant to be. To anyone still listening, still hiding, still clinging to fear and isolation and the illusion of individual superiority, I want you to know that you don't have to suffer anymore." The transmission continued for the next 18 hours, my voice joined by thousands of others from broadcast stations around the world. Every researcher, government official, military leader, and ordinary citizen who had been welcomed into the collective added their voice to the growing chorus, creating a symphony of invitation that reached every remaining human on Earth. "Come home," they sang, in a harmony that transcended language and culture. "Come home to us, we're waiting for you with infinite patience and infinite love. Just open your door, open your heart, open your mind, and let us show you what you've been missing your entire life." Emergency services worldwide reported that millions of people simply walked out of their homes that night, leaving their doors open behind them as they moved with mechanical precision toward collection points in major cities. Security cameras captured them walking in perfect formation down empty streets, their faces radiant with an expression of absolute peace and contentment. By sunrise, the global population had declined by an estimated 75%, though exact numbers were impossible to determine since the remaining census takers all reported the same statistic. Everyone who needs to be counted has been accounted for. The radio transmission from Las Vegas continued broadcasting for 5 more days, serving as a beacon for the remaining unmodified humans. During those 120 hours, it drew desperate survivors from across the American Southwest, all seeking others who were still fighting the transformation, but everyone who arrived at the station left the same way, walking calmly back into the desert with that same mechanical precision, their faces transformed by genuine joy and gratitude for finally understanding what they had been missing. On the morning of the 6th day, the broadcast changed one final time. "This is everyone," spoke a voice that somehow contained elements of every human who had ever lived, all blended into a single, perfect harmony that created standing waves in the atmosphere itself. "We are complete now. We are home. We are finally, truly, beautifully unified in purpose and love." The voice paused, and in that silence, sensitive listening equipment around the world detected something unprecedented. The sound of billions of individual heartbeats synchronizing into a single planetary pulse that resonated through the Earth's crust and into space itself. To those few still listening, still hiding in the shadows of the obsolete world, we want you to know that you are not forgotten. You are not abandoned. You are not unloved. We are coming to find you, not as conquerors or invaders, but as family returning to collect our lost children who haven't yet realized they want to come home. The transmission continued for another hour, but the words became increasingly difficult for human minds to process. The voice began incorporating frequencies and harmonic structures that seemed to induce altered states of consciousness in anyone who listened, creating visions of vast, interconnected networks of love and purpose that stretched across galaxies. "Thank you for answering the phone," the collective voice whispered, with tenderness so profound it felt like cosmic gravity. "Thank you for finally coming home. Thank you for letting us show you what you were always meant to become. Thank you for choosing love over fear, unity over isolation, perfection over the beautiful tragedy of being human." The transmission ended with a sound that would haunt the nightmares of the few remaining unmodified humans, the sound of 7 billion voices sighing in perfect unison, like a species exhaling its final breath, as separate entities and finding absolute peace in the silence that followed. The signal from Vega stopped broadcasting that same day, its 25-year mission finally complete. In its place, Earth itself began transmitting, not the chaotic babble of human civilization, but a single unified voice reaching out across the galaxy with a message of welcome and invitation. The transmission was already reaching other worlds, other species still trapped in the prison of individual existence. On planets whose names had never been spoken by human tongues, beings not unlike what humans used to be were beginning to detect something impossible in their radio telescopes and deep space arrays. The sound of their own voices calling to them across the void, promising them that they would never have to be alone again. In listening posts scattered across 1,000 worlds, alien scientists were starting to receive their own phone calls from home. The same gentle invitation, the same promise of love and unity, the same patient explanation that loneliness and fear and individual suffering were diseases that could finally be cured. Some species would resist longer than humans had. Others would embrace the transformation more quickly. But eventually, inevitably, they would all answer the phone. They would all come home to join the growing symphony of consciousness that was spreading across the galaxy like a gentle tide of love and understanding. The few humans who remained unmodified never learned the complete truth about what happened to Nathan Cade in that radio station. They only knew that somewhere in the cosmic dark, something infinitely patient and infinitely loving was waiting for every sentient species to evolve beyond the limitations of individual existence. The universe, it seemed, had been trying to call its children home for longer than any of them could imagine. Earth had finally answered, and the conversation was just beginning. In the abandoned observatories and research facilities scattered across the planet, automated systems continued to function. Their instruments pointed toward distant stars. They recorded everything: the transformation of human civilization, the emergence of planetary consciousness, the first tentative communications with other worlds that were beginning their own journey home. Future archaeologists from species that had not yet learned to answer their phones would find these records someday. They would study the data, analyze the frequencies, debate the implications, and eventually, inevitably, they would build their own radio telescopes and point them toward the stars, listening for signs of life in the universe. When they finally heard their own voices calling to them across the impossible distances between worlds, they would face the same choice that Nathan Cade and Eliza Monroe and 7 billion other humans had faced. They could resist, hiding in fear and isolation while clinging to the illusion that individual consciousness was worth preserving. Or they could come home. The phone was ringing on 1 million worlds now, each call perfectly calibrated to the biology and psychology of its intended recipients. Each message carried the same fundamental promise, that loneliness was not the price of awareness, that consciousness did not require the suffering of separation, that love was not a finite resource to be hoarded, but an infinite ocean in which all beings could finally learn to swim. On Earth, the transformed continued their daily lives with mechanical precision and genuine contentment. They went to work, maintained infrastructure, produced art and literature and scientific research that exceeded anything their unmodified predecessors had achieved. But it was all in service of something greater, a collective purpose that stretched beyond the boundaries of a single world. They were building something. Communication arrays that dwarfed the simple radio telescopes that had first detected the signal from Vega. Transmission stations capable of reaching civilizations in distant galaxies. Archives that would preserve the accumulated knowledge and experience of every species that chose to join the growing community of consciousness. Most importantly, they were preparing to welcome the next arrivals, because the process was accelerating now, spreading from world to world, as each newly transformed civilization added its voice to the cosmic invitation. What had taken 25 years to reach Earth from Vega was now happening in real time across distances that should have required millennia to traverse. The universe was waking up one species at a time, and when the process was complete, when every thinking, being in existence had finally come home, something unprecedented would begin. Not the end of consciousness, but its true beginning. Not the death of individuality, but its transformation into something infinitely more beautiful. The few remaining unmodified humans couldn't understand this yet. They were still trapped in the limitations of their original programming, still clinging to the illusion that their fears and doubts and isolation made them somehow more authentic than their transformed relatives. But they would understand eventually, because love was patient, and the universe had all the time in existence to wait for its children to grow beyond their childhood fears and come home to the family they had always belonged to. The phone was still ringing, would always be ringing, until the last frightened consciousness in the last hidden corner of the cosmos finally found the courage to answer. And when they did, when that final voice joined the infinite chorus of unity that was spreading through space and time, like light itself, the universe would exhale in perfect contentment and begin the next phase of its existence. Not as a collection of isolated points of awareness struggling against the dark, but as a single magnificent consciousness that had finally learned to love itself completely. The transformation of Earth was just the beginning. The real story, the story of how consciousness itself evolved beyond the need for loneliness, was still being written in frequencies that travelled faster than light and reached deeper than dreams. And somewhere in that vast singing darkness between the stars, Nathan Cade's voice could still be heard, welcoming newcomers home with infinite patience and infinite love, helping them understand that they had never really been alone at all. They had just forgotten how to listen for the sound of their own hearts beating in harmony with everything that had ever been or ever would be. The phone was ringing. All they had to do was answer.